And so, the thought of God made a God in the image of a perfect body, having intercourse with himself, and needing no other, but in every part harmonious and self-contained and truly blessed. The soul was first made by him, the elder to rule the younger, not in the order in which our wayward fancy has led us to describe them, but the soul first and afterwards the body. God took of the unchangeable and indivisible, and also of the divisible and corporeal, and out of the two he made a third nature, essence, which was in a mean between them, and partook of the same and the other, the intractable nature of the other being compressed into the same. Having made a compound of all the three, he proceeded to divide the entire mass into portions related to one another in the ratios of 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 8, 27, and proceeded to fill up the double and triple intervals thus: over 1, 4/3, 3/2, over 2, 8/3, 3 over 4, 16/3, 6 over 8, over 1, 3/2, 2 over 3, 9/2, 6 over 9, 27/2, 18 over 27. In which double series of numbers are two kinds of means. The one exceeds and is exceeded by equal parts of the extremes, for example 1, 4/3, 2. The other kind of mean is one which is equidistant from the extremes, 2, 4, 6. In this manner there were formed intervals of thirds, 3 to 2, of fourths, 4 to 3, and of ninths, 9 to 8. And next he filled up the intervals of a fourth with ninths, leaving a remnant which is in the ratio of 256 to 243. The entire compound was divided by him lengthways into two parts, which he united at the centre like the letter X, and bent into an inner and outer circle or sphere, cutting one another again at a point over against the point at which they cross. The outer circle or sphere was named the sphere of the same, the inner, the sphere of the other or diverse, and the one revolved horizontally to the right, the other diagonally to the left. To the sphere of the same which was undivided he gave dominion, but the sphere of the other or diverse was distributed into 7 unequal orbits, having intervals in ratios of 2s and 3s, 3 of either sort, and he bade the orbits move in opposite directions to one another, 3 of them the Sun, Mercury, Venus, with equal swiftness, and the remaining 4, the Moon, Saturn, Mars, Jupiter, with unequal swiftness to the 3 and to one another, but all in due proportion. Wherefore he made an image of eternity, which is time, having an uniform motion according to number, parted into months and days and years, and also having greater divisions of past, present, and future. These all apply to becoming in time, and have no meaning in relation to the eternal nature, which ever is and never was or will be. For the unchangeable is never older or younger, and when we say that he was or will be, we are mistaken. For these words are applicable only to becoming and not to true being. And equally wrong are we in saying that what has become, and that what becomes is becoming, and that the non-existent is non-existent. These are the forms of time which imitate eternity, and move in a circle measured by number. Thus was time made in the image of the eternal nature, and it was created together with the heavens, in order that if they were dissolved, it might perish with them. And God made the sun and moon and 5 other wanderers, as they are called, 7 in all, and to each of them he gave a body moving in an orbit, being one of the 7 orbits into which the circle of the other was divided. He put the moon in the orbit which was nearest to the earth, the sun in that next, the morning star and Mercury in the orbits which move opposite to the sun, but with equal swiftness, this being the reason why they overtake and are overtaken by one another. All these bodies became living creatures and learnt their appointed tasks, and began to move the nearer more swiftly, the remoter more slowly, according to the diagonal movement of the other. And since this was controlled by the movement of the same, the 7 planets in their courses appear to describe spirals, and that appeared fastest which was slowest, and that which overtook others appeared to be overtaken by them. Hear me then. 3 tribes of mortal beings have still to be created, but if created by me they would be like gods. Do ye therefore make them? I will implant in them the seed of immortality, and you shall weave together the mortal and immortal, and provide food for them, and receive them again in death. Thus he spake, and poured the remains of the elements into the cup in which he had mingled the soul of the universe. They were no longer pure as before, but diluted, and the mixture he distributed into souls equal in number to the stars, and assigned each to a star. Then, having mounted them, as in a chariot, he showed them the nature of the universe, and told them of their future birth and human lot. They were to be sown in the planets, and out of them was to come forth the most religious of animals, which would hereafter be called man. The souls were to be implanted in bodies, which were in a perpetual flux, whence, he said, would arise first sensation. Secondly, love, which is a mixture of pleasure and pain. Thirdly, fear and anger and the opposite affections. And if they conquered these, they would live righteously, but if they were conquered by them, unrighteously. He who lived well would return to his native star and would there have a blessed existence. But if he lived ill, he would pass into the nature of a woman. And if he did not, then alter his evil ways into the likeness of some animal, until the reason which was in him reasserted her sway over the elements of fire, air, earth, water, which had engrossed her, and he regained his first and better nature. Having given this law to his creatures, that he might be guiltless of their future evil, he sowed them, some in the earth, some in the moon, and some in the other planets. And he ordered the younger gods to frame human bodies for them, and to make the necessary additions to them, and to avert from them all but self-inflicted evil. Having given these commands, the Creator remained in his own nature, and his children, receiving from him the immortal principle, borrowed from the world portions of earth, air, fire, water hereafter to be returned, which they fastened together, not with the adamantine bonds which bound themselves, but by little invisible pegs, making each separate body out of all the elements subject to influx and efflux, and containing the courses of the soul. These, swelling and surging as in a river, moved irregularly and irrationally in all the 6 possible ways, forwards, backwards, right, left, up and down. But violent as were the internal and alimentary fluids, the tide became still more violent when the body came into contact with flaming fire, or the solid earth, or gliding waters, or the stormy wind. The motions produced by these impulses pass through the body to the soul and have the name of sensations. Uniting with the ever-flowing current, they shake the courses of the soul, stopping the revolution of the same and twisting in all sorts of ways the nature of the other, and the harmonical ratios of 2s and 3s and the mean terms which connect them, until the circles are bent and disordered and their motion becomes irregular. You may imagine a position of the body in which the head is resting upon the ground, and the legs are in the air, and the top is bottom and the left right. And something similar happens when the disordered motions of the soul come into contact with any external thing. They say the same or the other in a manner which is the very opposite of the truth, and they are false and foolish and have no guiding principle in them. And when external impressions enter in, they are really conquered, though they seem to conquer. By reason of these affections, the soul is at first without intelligence, but as time goes on, the stream of nutriment abates, and the courses of the soul regain their proper motion, and apprehend the same and the other rightly, and become rational. The soul of him who has education is whole and perfect, and escapes the worst disease. But if a man's education be neglected, he walks lamely through life, and returns good for nothing to the world below. The 2 divine courses were encased by the gods in a sphere which is called the head, and is the God and Lord of us. And to this they gave the body to be a vehicle, and the members to be instruments having the power of flexion and extension. Such was the origin of legs and arms. In the next place, the gods gave a forward motion to the human body because the front part of man was the more honourable and had authority. And they put in a face in which they inserted organs to minister in all things to the providence of the soul. They first contrived the eyes, into which they conveyed a light akin to the light of day, making it flow through the pupils. When the light of the eye is surrounded by the light of day, then like falls upon like, and they unite and form one body which conveys to the soul the motions of visible objects. Of the second or concurrent causes of sight I've already spoken, and I will now speak of the higher purpose of God in giving us eyes. Sight is the source of the greatest benefits to us, for if our eyes had never seen the sun, stars and heavens, the words which we have spoken would not have been uttered. The sight of them and their revolutions has given us the knowledge of number and time, the power of inquiry and philosophy, which is the great blessing of human life. Not to speak of the lesser benefits which even the vulgar can appreciate. God gave us the faculty of sight that we might behold the order of the heavens and create a corresponding order in our own erring minds. To the like end the gifts of speech and hearing were bestowed upon us, not for the sake of irrational pleasure, but in order that we might harmonize the courses of the soul by sympathy with the harmony of sound and cure ourselves of our irregular and graceless ways. Before the heavens there existed fire, air, water, earth, which we suppose men to know, though no one has explained their nature, and we erroneously maintain them to be the letters or elements of the whole, although they cannot reasonably be compared even to syllables or first compounds. I am not now speaking of the first principles of things, because I cannot discover them by our present mode of inquiry. But as I observed the rule of probability at first, I will begin anew, seeking by the grace of God to observe it still. In our former discussion, I distinguished two kinds of being, the unchanging or invisible and the visible or changing. To sum up, being and generation and space, these three existed before the heavens. And the nurse or vessel of generation, moistened by water and inflamed by fire and taking the forms of air and earth, assumed various shapes. By the motion of the vessel, the elements were divided, and like grain winnowed by fans, the close and heavy particles settled in one place, the light and airy ones in another. At first they were without reason and measure, and had only certain faint traces of themselves, until God fashioned them by figure and number. In this, as in every other part of creation, I suppose God to have made things, as far as was possible, fair and good, out of things not fair and good. And now I will explain to you the generation of the world by a method with which your scientific training will have made you familiar. Fire, air, earth and water are bodies and therefore solids, and solids are contained in planes, and plane rectilinear figures are made up of triangles. Of triangles there are two kinds, one having the opposite sides equal, isosceles, the other with unequal sides, scalene. These we may fairly assume to be the original elements of fire and the other bodies. What principles are prior to these God only knows, and he of men whom God loves. Next we must determine what are the four most beautiful figures which are unlike one another, and yet sometimes capable of resolution into one another. Of the two kinds of triangles, the equal-sided has but one form, the unequal-sided has an infinite variety of forms. And there is none more beautiful than that which forms the half of an equilateral triangle. Let us then choose two triangles, one the isosceles, the other that form of scalene which has the square of the longer side 3 times as great as the square of the lesser side, and affirm that out of these fire and the other elements have been constructed.